Let's take a look at Business Impact Analysis, or BIA. Business Impact Analysis is the crucial and key step in performing business continuity management and business continuity planning. It's during this phase we determine the potential impact to the business of a disruption to a critical service or process. It is important for us to identify those parts of the business which truly are critical, those that would impact the actual viability or survivability of the business if those services weren't working. So the purpose of business impact analysis then is to gain an understanding of our organization. This is done by measuring as the impact of an outage over time. Slightly different than risk assessment. Risk assessment looked at then the impact and the likelihood. Whereas BIA, we're going to measure the increase in impact on the organization the longer than a service is not available. If this system, if this network, if this process was not available, we can see that the amount of impact in both quantitative, financial, as well as qualitative, such as we can say here, reputation, customer confidence, these sorts of areas would increase to the point where we could say the business would not be able to survive. Obviously, the longer the outage, the higher that level of impact. This allows us to determine what is the maximum tolerable downtime, or MTD, that a process could be interrupted before the business itself would fail. So we can see here the importance of identifying the critical business processes. Some business processes are not as important. Here we are studying to be auditors, and certainly for most organizations, an internal audit function is not a critical business process. So therefore, we would not really be considered as something would threaten the viability of the organization if audit didn't work for a day or two or even a week or two. However, some parts of the business, if we were not able to provide that service to our customers, could mean that the business would actually fail, well, and sometimes within minutes, sometimes within hours, and other times within days. We want to determine that time period. Once we know the maximum tolerable downtime, the longest the business could possibly not provide that service and still recover, now we at least have the parameters, we have the brackets. So now we need to put together a plan that will make sure we can recover that critical business process before we reach that maximum tolerable downtime. So the impact of conducting a business impact analysis then is we'll identify what are the critical products and services for our organization. We'll identify the critical timelines that could interrupt a business process. And we'll also begin documenting what's necessary for that line of business to operate. We can say here we document the services and the supporting elements that would be necessary for that critical business process to operate, maybe not in its entirety, but at least in some sustainable level of service. So how do we gather all of this data in business impact analysis? Well, mostly by talking to the people know. We talk to the various stakeholders, we talk to then the business, we talk to management, we talk to the users, and we gather information perhaps through questionnaires that make sure we're asking the right questions. Or we could work together in a group with a facilitated workshop where a facilitator would get everyone to contribute. The advantage, of course, of that is that what one person doesn't think of, another one might. And you get some synergy there in that group. It's important, though, that if you do a facilitated workshop, that you also control the communication so that you're able to hear from everybody, not just from one or two, should we say, dominant personalities. The other important way to gather information about how important a line of business is actually to observe, to watch how does that business process operate. Sometimes we will find that the way that management perceives it operates is not really how it's done on a day-to-day basis. As an auditor, we know the importance of gathering accurate information. If I have not gathered accurate information in conducting the business impact analysis, then it's not only probable, but almost inevitable that the actual business continuity plan will not work. So as an auditor, we want to make sure that those people that are tasked with gathering the information in the business impact analysis phase truly are being thorough, they're being complete, and they're gathering all of the information necessary so we can write an effective plan. One of the things we have to determine is how much data could we lose. Now this indicates something we'll call then the recovery point objective. We know that if we have had an interruption to a service, and for example a server room was burnt down, and we're going to then rebuild those servers, reload the data on them, then the data we load on will be the data as of our most recent backup. So if there's been changes that were made to the data from the time of the backup until the time of the failure, there's a very good chance that data will be lost. What is that data worth? Different for different organizations. We can say that in some cases, our data may be fairly static and doesn't change much from one hour to the next. Whereas other organizations, where we're dealing with many transactions, the data can be worth millions of dollars in just a few minutes. This will drive then the type of backup and the frequency of backup we need to use. In determining the recovery point objective then, we have determined what is the amount of data that the organization could possibly lose, but without suffering undue harm. Not too expensive. So, following an interruption, since the data that has been then acquired since the last backup may not be recoverable, it's important then that we're able now to ensure that if this data is incredibly important, that we are mirroring our data sets instead of just backing them up, say, once an hour. It also could be important the style of backup we use. If we need to recover our systems quickly, then obviously disk is a far faster way to recover data than if we were to use something like a tape backup. So the RPO therefore determines the frequency at which we'll conduct backups to ensure a minimal acceptable data loss.